everybody. Welcome back to It's Like This podcast. This is your host, Dr. Eugene Kim. And today, for this discussion, I have my friend and a colleague, Dr. Ina Conboy. And Dr. Ina Conboy and I met honestly on a Facebook support group for private practice owners and a psychiatrist and a mom. And she and I connected through a few meetings and a few conversations. And what really drew me to Dr. Conboy was, I don't know if I ever told you since Dr. Conboy, but the spirit of wonder and curiosity and also humility really drew me, to you. And I was like, oh, I think this is somebody that I want to be friends with. We just wanted to kind of talk about the struggles of modern parenthood, and what is expected of us and what is not expected of us. How do we find ourselves in the middle of this craziness? Thank you so much for joining me here.
It's an honor to be here. I really appreciate you having me on this podcast. Thank you.
So tell me, Dr. Conboy, how many kids do you have?
I have two children, ages soon to be 6 and soon to be 4.
Mm-hmm.
And I am a private practice psychiatrist. And what I really loved about meeting you is that so I think you're the person who kind of started this whole site of like, hey, we're here as moms and we're here as psychiatrists and we're here as business owners. And it is so difficult to do all of it all at once. And there's just so much humility and effort and tears and love that go into all of it. And it's very real. And so that's what I really, really loved about meeting you is that you are trying to create a community of genuine, honest people who are struggling just as much as anybody else, where on the surface it may seem kind of perfect, but in reality, we're just trying to all to survive.
Absolutely. And I hope that the listeners kind of find comfort as Dr. Conboy and I share our struggles and our journey of finding ourselves, and our kids are pretty similar age, and we're not like the moms and like their kids are out and having grandkids and stuff. We're definitely in the intermediate, skilled moms. But I think when the society kind of places us, we're psychiatrists, so we feel like, and we do have this trained knowledge of these theories, but it is really hard to even apply those theories to ourselves. And the theory that I'm talking about is a good enough mom and is coined by the term by Dr. Donald Winnicott. And and I think it's very relevant today, as Ina and I talked on the text. It's like social media, all the Karen moms out there, saying, "Oh, you can't feed your baby that," or "You need to do this program for your baby." There are just a lot of judgments and perfectionistic expectations of parents. So, Dr. Conway, what do you see in your life or in your friends or in your patients' lives?
First of all, please feel free to call me Ina.
Yeah.
But
Let's go back to our first name basis.
sure. I actually have to admit that I think I was one of the Karens before I had kids. Like this idea of what a good mom is and what a good dad and how I'm going to be. And then I became a parent myself, and all of that went out the window.
Yeah.
And I think what I really had to develop for myself is a lot of empathy
Mm,
for who I am and what my needs are and how I want to be with my kids. And kind of really take a good look at my own family structure, where I came from, be in my own therapy, even to kind of
mm,
help understand where I'm at now as a mom. And I mean, societal expectations are unreal. They're just like, I think that the whole speech in the Barbie movie, if you've seen it, is just
mm,
sums it all up, where it's like you're
mm,
expected to be all of these things and it's impossible. Um,
mm.
and what do you do about it? And the reality is, I think you just have to really dig into so much empathy, like for myself and where I'm at now, and also for my kids and where they're at now,
Mm.
and even for my husband. Let's do that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. You mentioned something that's interesting because you said that you were once the Karen on the other side of parenthood. And I think I can definitely agree that when I was going through my child psychiatry training, you see all these quote unquote problematic kids, but then you also see quote unquote problematic parents, right? And then you're just like,
Mm-hmm.
well, they're just copying you. And it was easy to say, and there's grain of truth in that, of course, and that applies to ourselves too. But it was really easy for me as somebody who didn't have kids to say, well, it makes logical sense, like
Mm-hmm.
analytically it makes sense. But on the other side of parenting, I think empathy and just me struggling through just staying sane, and
Mm-hmm.
staying composed. And sometimes I lose my composure many, many times. The struggle is real, and yeah, so I definitely had to repent and apologize to all my patients that I judged, before too soon, prematurely. But you also mentioned something that was very interesting because you mentioned how you were raised and your family structure affecting, and we can dig a little bit into that categorically because where is this perfectionistic expectations from our parents or family culture, from society, from random person in the playground? Like, where is this coming from? Like, it's a very philosophical question, but why do we hold that to each other and ourselves?
Yeah, that is a really deep question. I think it definitely is very individual, but I think that's the beauty of having a family. On one hand, as kids, we're trying to individuate ourselves and find our own paths. And then ultimately, we try to find our way back into our heritage and where we come from and how we fit into this lineage of people that came before us. And I think that's I think that's just part of, I guess, our human nature of who we are and our attachment. And
Mm,
so I I don't know. I think that I definitely struggled a lot between how I see myself as an individual and how I see myself as part of a greater whole of my
hmm.
family and society. Um, I mean, do you think that you have struggles like that at all for yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that I kind of find is I judge when I'm insecure.
Hmm.
I judge when I don't quite know where I fit in. And I feel like when I'm insecure, I gravitate to few informations or few concepts, or sets of beliefs, and I tend to judge people based on that lens that I see. But I think just like being a parent opened my eyes in a whole new world of failures and successes, then I think my scope expands. And I feel like in that process of experiencing different aspects of life and through struggling through it, I start to be less insecure and more accepting, of
Hmm.
like parents. So now, like when I see parents struggling, I'm like, yeah, dude, like I know it takes like 110% of your effort to like not spank your child in public, So I have
Hmm.
so much acceptance and grace when I'm not insecure, and judgy about it. You know what I mean?
Hmm. It's interesting because as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about how when I was younger, I definitely identified more with kids because I was a kid. I was somebody's
Mm,
child. And
mm,
now I'm in a position where I feel I'm in between. I'm in between my mom as a child or my dad, my mom and
mm-hmm,
dad
mm-hmm,
as a child, but I'm also now a parent to a child.
mm-hmm.
And as their kids are getting older, I can't help but compare what they're going through at their age with what I went through at their
Oh
age.
yeah.
And so
Mm-hmm.
then thinking about how my mom and my dad raised me and the
Yeah.
judgments I had of them as a child, be like, well, this wasn't well done well. Like I'll do it so much better.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And then and now as an adult, I'm thinking like, oh my goodness, like I have so much empathy for them. They were had so much on their plate. And if I was in their shoes as a parent going through everything that they were going through, I don't know if I would have handled it as well. And
Mm,
maybe I would have done the same thing. And so like
Mm,
I feel so stuck between I'm constantly like wanting to empathize with my children, knowing that they don't have any other experience except that what they have now, and
mm,
also empathizing with my parents, having that knowledge now as a child, but also now having the knowledge as a parent. And I
yeah,
think that's kind of what's helping me to be more kind, because there's just so many perspectives I'm now seeing that I haven't seen before, and
yeah.
which I'm very fortunate to be able to do. And so I think, yes, like I think it does take sometimes a lot of effort, like you said, to like not spank your child in public or even in private.
Hmm,
Like
hmm,
just not
hmm.
spank your, like sometimes they're just like so much rage can come over,
Yeah,
and um yeah, it's a lot to deal with, and
yeah.
to like hold space for all of it all at once is sometimes definitely overwhelming.
So let's talk about what good enough mom is, because rage and anxiety and worry and guilt those are all parts of human nature that gets accentuated, when you have a little one.
Hmm.
But I think one way that the Karens or the social media perfectionists, whatever, they respond is, no, 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 you have to keep it all in. You have to keep it all in. And like you said, you have to create that space for everybody. You cannot mess up on that. You have to be 110% emotionally available for your kid or your husband, marriage, career, or you have to be able to balance it all. If not, you're a big failure and everybody's gonna die. Like that catastrophizing fear, of that aspect. But the concept of good enough mom is actually you failing at certain areas and not being good enough allows your kids, maybe your husband, to experience, some things that they can kind of figure it out on their own, so in that sense, we don't have to coddle, we don't have to be everybody for everyone, but we can kind of say, hey, I can't do this right now. Like, I cannot, so that we don't become a pressure cooker. We're filling, within our max limits and kind of letting other people or kids kind of take ownership of their own journey. So that's the theory. How do you think kind of that applies in real life?
Oh, in so many ways. I mean, I'm thinking of an example of my oldest daughter is a perfectionist. And she's a perfectionist to a point of when she draws something that she doesn't like, she gets upset, she throws a tantrum, and she doesn't know
Mm-hmm.
how to undo it yet. And I think this is part of her nature. Like there's a little bit of OCD in her. And it runs in our family in some ways. Like we have that streak, that personality. And I must admit that I have some of it too. Like there are times where I'm just like, you need to do certain things this way, and you need to clean up. You need to do it now. You need like there's just like I'm an organizer,
Mm-hmm.
and I have to often catch myself because her perfectionism to a point of like was so exaggerated of like being so upset when she doesn't draw something.
Mm-hmm.
It's I must admit sometimes it's annoying. It's very like
Mm-hmm.
it's just like come on girl, like this is not a big deal, like life is so much bigger
Mm-hmm.
than this, like no no no
Mm-hmm.
biggie. And then I have to step back and be like, oh wait, I think I'm modeling a lot of it myself by saying like, okay, you got to do it, no, this is not the way you do it, you should do it this way.
Uh-huh.
And so I catch myself and I'm thinking by I probably actually need to be modeling a bit more of like I just messed up, and
Yeah.
how do I manage this mess up and
Uh-huh.
help her get through these mess ups that she makes as well.
Mm.
And so I've kind of been trying to be a bit more authentic of like, well, yes, I made a mistake. And she, by the way, is very good at pointing out when I make mistakes. She's like,
I love it.
Mommy, you just
Uh-huh.
like why did you do this? You just like put this there. And she almost sounds exactly like me when she says it.
Yeah.
And so she's my mirror in some ways. And so
Mm.
I think I am practically working on just being my authentic self and being okay with making mistakes. And in doing so, it think it will rub off on her. And then sometimes I
Yeah.
hear her talking to her younger sister when she does something, then she says something like, "Oh no, that's okay. No worries. Like we can clean this up. We can do this. Like it's not a
Mm.
big deal. You just like made a mess on the floor." And
Yeah.
so I think those little aspects are so important because um if we present certain perfection uh facade to the world, then we inadvertently make a statement that there's no room for mistakes, there's no room for error, and that's just not how life is.
Yeah.
And then we don't help our kids to learn how to manage them, because they will come up one way or
Yeah.
another, whether we want to or not. Like, nothing is perfect, they will happen. And so I think the key, in some ways, one of the keys, I think there are many keys here, but one of the keys is to learn to accept the imperfection within ourselves first and
Mm.
foremost, and be able to model it.
Yeah. It is a process of acceptance that being a good enough mom is okay. And I think that's very hard to accept too, because it's hard to give grace to yourself. It's hard to say, it's okay, to yourself, because I think we love our kids and so much are at stake that we don't want to mess up, but to say to ourselves, hey, it's okay. Like, I'm not the best mom, and that is okay. And what is a best mom, anyways?
Absolutely. But I think even the whole like phrase, like good enough mom, sounds not
Mm.
very great. Like, who wants to
Yeah.
have a B rating on your mom? Like no one wants
Yeah.
that. Like that's not cool. Like,
Yeah.
I want an A. I want an A plus. Like, I want to do
Yeah.
really well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think it's like, in some ways, accepting that we are just not, I mean, good enough is, it sounds in some ways defeated. But
Mm.
it's not
Mm-hmm.
defeated, but
Mm-hmm.
it is in a
Mm-hmm.
way
Mm-hmm.
accepting that, and unlearning that we need to like do our best all the time and thrive and constantly be like on top. Like, I mean, there's just so much that goes into our education. Like, it's just kind of difficult to get to like this idea of like being a good enough mom is actually really good.
Hi, if you enjoyed this content, please subscribe and write a review. This increases our visibility in platforms like podcast platforms or YouTube, and it will help us out a lot. And also, if you enjoyed this episode, think of one person that you can share this episode with who could benefit from what we're talking about today. Okay, let's go back to the episode. Because, in so many ways too, because being a perfect mom stole the joy of parenthood.
Mm-hmm.
And being a perfect mom feels like we're not good unless we had to prove, like, we get a report card and our kids go to XYZ college, or they're like thriving in D1 sports or something. Like,
Mm-hmm.
being this perfect and having, it's like a moving target, because what is perfect anyways? Like, if you're perfect in feeding your kid organic food and you're like, that's where all your budget goes, right? Then you can't pay for the extracurricular. Like, what is perfect? And everybody's being
Sure.
stretched so thin. And so this even facade of perfect parenting not only steals a joy, but then it's like, well, not only do I have to aim for perfection, but now I have to prove that I was perfect. And it's just like a rat race of craziness. And that good enough mom is almost, I hope that it becomes like a movement where, who are you proving yourself to? Like, and why are you proving yourself? And bring back the fun and joy of not meeting these standards, but just kind of owning your own journey and owning your own style. And eventually the kids are going to learn that they don't have to live somebody else's expectations.
Absolutely. And I think that in doing all of that, it actually brings in it in some ways an imperfectly perfect life,
Mm.
which is
Mm-hmm.
exactly kind of what we're in trying not to be perfect. We're actually really truly gonna enjoy life so much more. It's
Yeah.
it's almost kind of like the opposite. Like, we think that if we're perfect, that things will be great, but it's actually the opposite.
Yeah. And when I was kind of thinking about my moments of practicing good enough mom is, whenever I'm making a big childcare decisions or something like that, is I'm not trying to be selfish and like what makes me happy, but what makes me able to be more present and attentive and sensitive. What do I need to be able to do that with the times that I have with my kids? Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So like one big decision was we decided to put the older one in after school care, I had this fear of perfection. It's like, no, I need every single hour and minute with my older kid or he'll feel, neglected. So I had to pick him up as soon as school's over. But that was giving me a lot of stress to rush to school and all that stuff, with my husband's job. So then I just realized the only thing that was holding me back from after school was my fear of not being perfect. And I was like, let me just try to just give myself a little bit of wiggle room. Like I still pick him up relatively early, but it just gave me the buffer to not feel so stressed so that when I'm picking him up, I'm actually saying, hey, like, how was school? Versus like, let's go, let's go pick up your brother, so it just gave me a lot of freedom to think of it like that.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I have so many examples like that of kind of giving certain things up in my mind of what I need to do in order to create better atmosphere. I mean, one of the things that comes to my mind is when my kids were babies. At first, I don't necessarily want to start this whole like argument for the listeners or anyone else about like co-sleeping with kids or
Mm-hmm,
anything.
hmm.
There's like different philosophies there, but when I went into the whole thing, I was like, never co-sleeping. I want my space, and then had kids. And honestly, co-sleeping really helped me stay sane. And we did it in the safest way possible as far as co-sleeping
Hmm.
goes. And the only way I could get sleep, because I was nursing, is if the child was with me. And I did what's actually even more like better for me. Like it wasn't, my theory wasn't like, this is the way it is and I'm supposed to be doing
Yes,
this. I did it
right.
because it fit the narrative of my life and
Hmm.
who I and helped me maximize my potential as a mother, basically. Like I
Yeah.
was more nurturing. I was able to get sleep. I was able to function. And for me personally, I didn't really see another way that I could do it in a way that would be helpful
Right.
for anybody involved. And so I do think that ultimately, as parents, like we have to look at our personalities and who we are. I mean, definitely go to therapy if we need to process certain things, but also
Hmm.
be kind to ourselves in a way that will then help us be kind to our children.
Yeah.
Because if someone's forcing me a way to be as a parent that totally contradicts who I am or just doesn't fit like my lifestyle, I don't know if I'll
Yeah.
be a really good parent, honestly. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, my husband and I kind of joke, like, like people ask, like, what is your parenting style? Like, is it attachment? Is something else? I'm like, honestly, our style is whatever the F works. Like, that's our style.
It's a convoy style.
Yeah, it's the Conboy style. I mean,
Yeah.
because it's just like we pick up a little bit of this, we pick up a little bit of
Hmm.
that. And like you also have to tailor it to the kid too, because kids
Yeah,
are so different
absolutely.
personalities. What works for one kid will not work for the other kid. It's just
Yeah.
there's just constant like adjustments. But I think it's not just the kids. We have to really truly take ourselves into consideration of what works for us, like as a mom, as a parent of any kind.
Yeah. And I love that because, I'm kind of going back to the good enough mom, being sensitive, responsive, and adaptive, not only for your kids' needs, but your needs. Because let's be honest, I mean, you and I opened like private practice, what, only a few years ago, right? And
Yep.
that required a lot of stages of adapting to our needs because the business needs changed. And
Absolutely. And I will say that there is a part of me that actually has a lot of empathy also for the Karens because it's just like
mhm,
how difficult is it to be them in some ways? Like how much
yeah.
pressure do they put on themselves? And then like you said in the beginning of when we started talking, like uh when you usually are more judgmental of others when you kind of like
It's
unsure of where
insecure.
you're
Yeah, insecure.
insecure. Like how insecure are these Karens? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah,
It just makes
absolutely.
me I have a lot of empathy for them and also for just like and the fathers, by the way. Where's the good enough father? There should be a theory about
Mm,
that. We talk about the good enough
yeah.
mothers, but
Yes.
the
Yes.
fathers too.
Yeah. And I say Karens as of like not to categorize them, but especially for them because I think we all have potential to be Karens and we all have past being a Karen, and
Absolutely.
it's just to give us hope that you don't have to meet any kind of standards. You don't have to meet any kind of theories. And I don't know. I think social media sometimes worked against it because what I hear is like when people are like, oh, did you learn about the attachment theory? Or like, did you do Enneagram tests for your kids? Like because of the information are like in our face, then we are like, we're not doing enough. We're missing out on something, like, fear of missing out on some kind of other information or other sets of belief or institutionalized, tests and methods. But like, just to say that people did fine, relatively fine. But what's more important is to be authentic, adaptive, and sensitive to you and your family's needs.
Absolutely. Flexibility. I guess it's like it goes back to being as flexible as possible, which is personally incredibly difficult for me to do. I mean, like
Yeah.
I think I'm learning and I'm getting better as I get older, but it's kind of riding the waves as opposed to like fighting them and drowning in them as you're trying to swim
Mm-hmm.
across. Um,
Mm-hmm.
it's really, really hard. So I mean, we're talking about this and it's easier said than done.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're definitely in the thick of it with everybody who's listening. Kind of let's talk about those moments when we do mess up, or when we find flaws. How can we give ourselves grace in those moments?
Well, how can we give grace? Well, I cry. Uh, I cry. I sometimes just I meditate. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how everyone handles their own stressors, but for me personally, mindfulness meditation has been really
Mm-hmm.
huge in taking a step back
Mm-hmm.
and being able to ground myself into to kind of see things as they are. I think it's important to take a moment in so many situations and kind of like check yourself. So for me,
Mm.
it's my meditation, and honestly, also it's my husband too. Sometimes he like comes over to me and he like whispers to me like you're being too harsh on the kids, and
Mm.
that in
Mm-hmm.
itself is actually really good for me because
Yeah.
I don't take it as criticism. I do the same thing
Mm-hmm.
to him too. Like I'm like
Mm-hmm.
when the kids are not listening, I'm like, babe, you're kind of going overboard right now,
Mm-hmm.
and he listens too. And I think
Mm-hmm.
sometimes it's helpful to have another perspective of like
Yeah.
seeing yourself of what's happening.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's so for me personally, it's the taking the step back, looking at things, and being able to evaluate the situation in a more kind of clear mind, taking a time out.
Yeah. And I like that you and your spouse have a grace-filled an accountability of sort where you're not accusing each other of like you did this and that's why the kids are mad or you did this and there's no accusatory, but it's a gentle check of, hey, like let's ground ourselves, let's kind of come back to the present, let's kind of figure this out, like that time out for each other. That aspect of teamwork has been so monumental in our home too, where let's be honest, sometimes our past childhood trauma or, past, cognitive distortions or our messed up thinking kind of plays out in how we parent. And my
Absolutely.
husband had to kind of call me out like, whoa, like, why did you ever say that to him? Like, or I'm like, why are you walking out on our kids when they're crying? So we kind of, in a way, bring the insight to our own unmet needs, as children.
Hmm.
So that was really wonderful to have. I think for me, some of the thoughts that really helped me is number one, I told myself that I'm supposed to mess up. And in the world of you should not mess up, there's a thought through my meditation and like reading the Bible is like, I'm supposed to mess up. And somehow that gave me like a really comforting something to fall back on. It's like, oh, I'm supposed to mess up and this is supposed to happen. And it just really gave me the freedom to like not prove myself. Like if anything, I'm in the journey of proving that I'm messed up, so that gave me a lot of freedom. And the second thought was always comparing me, not to other moms, but me to the older versions of mom, where my anger was so much more explosive, like let's say 6 months ago, but now I can kind of ground myself enough to like give me time out. And I did yell, but it was not as big, chaotic experience 6 months ago. So always kind of tracking my progress to being more authentic and being more sensitive, to everybody's needs, versus like older version of me.
I really love the first part that you said, that how you talk to yourself about how you're supposed to mess up, and you kind of
Yeah.
remind yourself that. I love it so much because as I'm getting older, I'm kind of starting to realize that none of us are going to escape the condition of humanity, of where life is really, really hard, and that we're
Yeah.
going to have struggles, and that in some ways we're actually doing ourselves and our children a disservice if we're trying to limit too much suffering from them, because
Mm,
it's going to happen. I mean, suffering is just part of this life, and
yeah.
only thing we can do is not necessarily take the suffering away, is to help them learn how to gracefully go through the suffering. And so when you said that, this is, I'm supposed to be this way, like I'm supposed to struggle, I'm supposed to like this is part of the journey. And
Mm,
so
absolutely. And, in the world that we live in, fear of failure is so crippling because of the fear of failure, we don't try.
mhm,
And we don't get up again, and so I'll just say that I was not always preaching this message to myself or to others, but like you said, like throughout life, we're 30 something, we're relatively young, but not too young. And the message that I love is that there's no such thing as failure. And what I tell people is just better mistakes,
mhm,
and you will always make better mistakes. There's no such thing as the end. As long as there's breath in your lungs, you can try again. And what I tell people is you have nothing to lose. I think here's the thing. With the perfectionistic perspective, you have everything to lose if you're not 0.00001%, of
mhm,
perfection. But when you just take that out, take that ceiling off, when you're just going through your journey, you have nothing to lose.
mhm.
You're just
It's just
making
growth.
better mistakes.
Yep.
I really liked, you and me sharing, just thinking out loud on these concepts, because we hear that and then we're like, well, how do I apply to my messed up life? Or how do I apply to, when my kids are crying and I'm like screaming at them? Like, how do I apply to that?
So I, I don't have a very good answer because, like you said, I'm continuously learning, and so
Yeah.
there are days when I'm like, oh, I handled that really well, and then there are days I'm like, wow, that wasn't well at all.
Yeah.
So I'm not even sure if I'm a good person to tell other people how to handle this. The only
Yeah.
thing I can say is just continually like striving to do better, like to like,
Yeah.
okay, maybe next time I will not just get so irritable when my
Mm.
kid is crying for the fifth time because they can't put their sock on. um and also just apologize. Like I come from a family where apologies were non-existent. Like it was not something
Yeah.
that was done. And when I got married to my husband, Patrick was like, you never apologize. And I was like, I got very defensive over that. And of course, over the years, I kind of really learned to say, like, I'm sorry. Like, I am in the vulnerable place and I am admitting to that. And I made a mistake. And I do that with my kids.
Yeah.
Um, and I have to say, sometimes it's really hard to do because
Mm.
there's a part of me in the way that I was raised, like you always present a certain like authoritative aspect, or even
Mm.
sometimes authoritarian. I don't like
Mm-hmm.
authoritarian part, but it does come through. And so I constantly have to be like, oh, okay, reflect on myself. I just did this,
Mm.
and I'm going to try to work on it next time. And
Mm-hmm.
it takes time. Like so, I don't really have very good like way of saying like, well, if you do this, you're going to turn out like just great. And every time it's going to be greater and you're going to continue growing. Growth is never linear. And so I take steps back and then I take some steps forward
Mm-hmm.
and kind
Mm-hmm.
of and I'm hoping that again, I'm modeling to my kids that I'm a human being. I'm flawed. I'm not perfect. I am going to make mistakes of how I react. Um, and then I'm going to try to patch up our relationship because our relationship and my love for you is what matters the most. And
Mm-hmm.
I want you to always know that I love you very much. And I will work on it. I will continue working on it.
Yeah. I think that I love the theme that just kind of came out from our discussion is that in the concept of good enough people, it's a revolutionary thinking where it's not all or nothing. Well, I enjoyed this conversation and I feel really encouraged to even think out loud and encourage ourselves, as we encourage the listeners. Um, so tell me a little bit about your private practice and how we can find you.
Thank you so much, Eugene. I mean, I first of all just want to say also that this has been a very uh, pleasurable conversation. I think that like as we're talking, I'm looking at you because we're doing this through Zoom, and I feel a connection. Like there is a
Mm,
connection of like yes, we have our own families, but then there's also a connection of like a human just kindred spirit of a
yeah.
mom and also a psychiatrist. And even though our cultural and familial backgrounds may be different, there is like a human aspect to it that's so connecting. And
Yes.
I think that that's also kind of what we're talking about is that that recognition of imperfection and just humanity in each other. And we can
Yeah,
do that
absolutely.
by starting with ourselves, and then we can see it in others. And it's a really good feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Um, as for my practice, so I am in private practice in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. I have it's virtual, and if anyone is interested in finding a psychiatrist who also does psychotherapy, I do a lot of psychodynamic psychotherapy where we explore our inner selves and how we connect to our families and life as a whole. You can find me on my website, conboypsychiatryllc.com. Conboy spelled Conboy, psychiatryllc.com.
And I really liked how you described that this was like a shared human experience and it was like we were sharing our testimony of like, oh, this is how I'm human. And you're like, this is how I'm human, and we're like, oh, it's like the same thing, and it is really spiritual to be in that place. And
Mhm.
I loved your vulnerability and willingness to kind of share your struggles because we need a little bit more of that, and
Absolutely. Thank you, Eugene. I think it's great that you have this podcast and thank you for having me.
thank you guys for listening. And I hope that you got encouraged and I'll see you in the next episode.